For this video, I want to share a coloring effect that creates a delayed blur between objects that can look very hypnotic and fun to apply. You can see here in this example from Sunken Succubus on Twitter as she dangles her pendant, how it starts looking normal, and then as the time goes on, it gets more and more distorted with each one of those semi-pendants hanging out in space. And we're going to explore some different ways to create this effect, some different things we can do with it as well. But in order to create it, we're going to bring the original clip into the frame. You'll see that there is now no effect on that pendant. It's simply the pendant as it originally was. There's no multiple pendants or colors. One thing that's good to know about this particular effect style is that it is most effective when used where there's one object moving or only a few objects moving and the rest is still as an anchor, because everything that is moving will have this red, blue, green color effect to it. And if too many things are moving, it can become something of a blur. Now, in order to correct it, we're going to use what's called the Color Balance RGB. So in Adobe Premiere Pro, you'll go up to your effects panel, Color Balance RGB. You're going to place that onto the clip itself. What this effect allows you to do is to increase the saturation or pull out the saturation of different colors. And you can use it to different levels of effects. We are also going to switch the blend mode to linear dodge add, which stacks each of the color palettes on top of each other if you stack them, the images on top of each other. We're going to recreate it 3 times, place them on top of each other in the timeline, place them on top of each other in the timeline, and you'll see right now it got really bright because they are stacked on top of each other, 3 straight images, so there's just a lot of luminosity. We're going to fix that here. Going to the top of the 3, I'm going to reduce green and blue down to 0. So with all 3 added together, the middle 2 being normal, and then the top one being only red, you see there's a red tint to it. I go to the one in the middle, remove red and blue, and then I go to the one at the end and remove red and green. A personal thing that I do just to keep things straight is that I align red, green, and blue with the top, middle, and bottom tracks that I'm using just to make it easier to tell what's going on. And you can see that because each one is stacked on top of each other and they each represent the full palette of that color, when they're stacked, it looks exactly like it did before. But we have 3 tracks, and so we can manipulate each one of those tracks one at a time. The first way you can play with this effect is to move the tracks down individually, and you will see that it creates an even sustained difference between the objects. So you see the red object, the yellow object, the red object, the green object, and blue object, which really creates that. You see the red object, blue object, and yellow object, each in their own place in space, and that generally stays consistent from the very beginning of the image to the end of the image. If you want to clean that up, you remove the ends so that it starts and finishes at the same point. Another thing you can do, however, is, let's go back. I'm hitting Control-Z to go back, get us back to all of our original sizes, get us back to our original stack. What if I wanted to start looking normal and then get more and more divergent over time? So I click the R key, which allows me to just drag out and change the speed of each clip to a specific duration of my choosing. So we now see that the bottom track is at normal speed, the middle track is at 94% speed, and the top track is at 87% speed. So each one's lost about 6 to 7%. Now we watch it how at the very beginning it's almost together, but the longer the track goes, the farther and farther they spread apart. And again, you can clean up the end by closing those tips. And if you want to see that repeating, again, these aren't going to be matched up terribly well. It gets farther and farther apart, and then when it sets back to the beginning, those colors are closer together. You can manipulate that pacing any way that you particularly want. So if you want that original state to last longer, or you want it to go for 1 repetitions of the clip the normal way, and then for it to change, so you can do the exact same thing to 2 repetitions of the clip, and then this one will remain perfectly normal as it goes back and forth, and then it'll only start breaking apart here where you introduce that second clip. Another couple of fun things that you can do with this is, let's go back to the base pictures with the RGB color balance. Okay, if you take the saturation on all three images to 0. So I'm going to go to the Lumetri color panel on the top right, and I take all three and change saturation to 0. I have a gray image that is overexposed. There's too much brightness, but hold on. And we're going to fix the brightness in a second. But you see, I now have a black and white version of that same effect, which can be very ghost-like and cool. To fix the oversaturation, you're going to go into each one. I prefer like a -2 exposure. So you go into Lumetri Color, go to Exposure, -2 on each of these tracks. And it'll come out about even to the original picture. You can change that up and down however you want, and you get that ghostly effect. Finally, another way that you can manipulate this is, what if you want the grayscale for the base, but you want the color to affect in the blur? If you reorder on all three tracks the Lumetri color effect, so the saturation to be above the color balance, so it affects the image before the color balance takes effect on the image on all three tracks, what you'll get is, interestingly enough, a underexposed image now. So you have to take all of the exposures in the tracks back to 0 to get something more like the original image. And then the color effect will be there on the blurred object, while the original remains in black and white.